Now, my case was dropped when evidence came out just before it went to the jury of criminal action by the Nixon administration against me outside the court case to shut me up. Not coincidentally, not just an interesting biped, this administration, I should say the Trump administration rather, which brought this indictment, did the same criminal acts against Julian Assange that led to the dismissal of charges against me. That included warrantless wiretapping, surveillance, in his case, surveillance of, because they had access to him at the Ecuadorian embassy secretly and illegally, surveillance of his discussions with his lawyers. I don't think that arose in my case particularly. Well, why not? They had illegal surveillance of me, illegal surveillance of his discussions with his doctors. It occurs to me as I say this, that had its exact counterpart. Of course, the so-called plumbers acting for the White House under Nixon went into my former psychoanalyst's office, doctor's office, in pursuit of information. There, not to blackmail me, but to threaten me with release and shut me up as a result. But in Julian's case, information on his ability to hold out there in terms of his medical discussions. He was under, throughout the 7 years, most of that time, in extreme pain from shoulder ligament injuries, harm, and also from dental problems that could not be dealt with in the Ecuadorian embassy. And the British government refused all requests to allow him to get the MRIs and the dental investigation that he needed without arresting him and essentially shipping him to the U.S. So he was in pain during that whole time, as I saw when I visited him twice in the Ecuadorian embassy. The first time, he looked all right. It was a long discussion. The second time, he looked terrible, and that was long before he was finally kidnapped and brought out of the embassy. And that, of course, has continued to be true in this high security, maximum security prison, Belmarsh, in which he's been held. Again, there is no excuse for his being in a high security prison like that, in essential solitary confinement, except that in the eyes of now President Biden, when he was vice president, that what he had done in telling these truths was it made him a high-tech terrorist. Now that's ridiculous. Truth-telling, giving out information, whatever you thought of it, terrorism, absurd. But at the same time, Hillary Clinton, then Secretary of State, was saying he should be droned, that is, assassinated, or let me be more specific. She raised the question, why don't we drone him? As, for example, President Obama, same administration, did drone an American citizen born in this country, Anwar al-Awlaki, put him on a list for execution by drone without any due process, any charges having been brought against him, any proceedings, no whatever, for him to be killed. Judge, jury, executioner. And weeks later, Anwar al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son, also an American citizen born in this country, was droned and killed in a context has never been explained. So that family was wiped out by our Democratic President Obama when Biden was the vice president. Okay, so the desire to get him is spelled out very lucidly by Chris Hedges today. He did, in fact, inconvenience, threaten, expose the empire. And like any empires, there is no empire that has not committed torture, assassination, and generally, as in our case, coups, military coups, various illegal activities. We are not exceptional in that respect. So as we do know, what Julian Assange revealed as given him by Chelsea Manning was a program of torture that in which case we were not doing it directly, allegedly, as the previous administration, George W. Bush had done, but we were turning prisoners over to Iraqi authorities that we knew would torture him. To do that was as illegal in international law, in the Torture Convention, as doing the torture ourselves. And it goes right up to the top. Chelsea Manning and thus Julian revealed that that was going on under Obama at that very time. So Obama, yes, could have been brought before an international criminal court and charged with violating this, what is described as jus cogens, a kind of action that cannot be legitimized, cannot be made legal by any legislature, by any executive branch. It ranks with an old problem of piracy. But there's a few acts, like genocide, that no executive branch can make legal. As they say, it's non-derogable. And yet, this was violated not only by Trump and by, well, that's later, and by George W. Bush. Let me take out the Trump part for a moment on this one issue of torture. But specifically George W. Bush and then Obama, by turning these over, were clearly violating that, violation under international law and domestic law, our domestic law, and our Constitution. Couldn't be more illegal. And yet, it so happens Obama chose to effectively decriminalize torture, which he can't do legally. It's meaningless. But he did it effectively by refusing to prosecute. And by the way, one of the obligations of the parties to the Torture Convention, of which we are one, is to investigate any reasonable allegation of torture, to investigate it and to prosecute any of those found guilty of that and accountable. Again, President Obama was violating that. So, of course, their desire to get Chelsea Manning, who revealed this, subject ultimately to 7.5 years, largely in solitary confinement, even while she was accused before convicted. She was in solitary confinement that, according to the then UN rapporteur on torture, amounted to torture. And it was only public protest that got her out of that solitary confinement, isolation in Quantico. I got arrested twice in that occasion. There was a lot of public protest, got her into the general holding. My friend Mordecai Vanunu spent in Israel 11.5 years out of a 17-year sentence for revealing Israel's nuclear program. He spent in solitary confinement. And again, following that case, was very clear that it had the usual results on him psychologically, emotionally, mentally, while he was in that 11.5 years in a tiny cell. I think it was something like 6 by 9 feet. Ridiculous. And when he was finally released into the general population, it made all the difference in the world to him. So we're coming right back to this situation, but I'm saying it didn't just start with this, that when Nils Melzer, the current UN rapporteur on torture and crimes, other inhumane practices, says this amounts to torture, and not, of course, only for these particular victims, but for all the people in the U.S. who are held for prolonged periods. It's clearly a violation of international law, domestic law, and everything else. Revealing that sort of practice makes you subject not only to prosecution, but to the full weight of the state, which definitely includes violation of your right to life. Again, to show that this isn't just something new, I repeat, the very same efforts were made against me. As I say, I had 12 felony counts, amounting to a possible 115 years. He has under mostly the same charges, 17 counts, I think, a possible 175 years. But aside from that proceeding, as I say, there were efforts to, quote, incapacitate Daniel Ellsberg totally. That came from the Oval Office. And did it mean kill me? Well, as the prosecutor said, the words were incapacitate you totally. But then he said, you have to realize these guys, who were all CIA assets, mostly from the Bay of Pigs, never used the word kill. They have euphemisms, neutralize, terminate with extreme prejudice. various things. They don't like to use the word kill. Chris Hedges very properly is saying what they have in mind for Julian Assange is death in custody. In fact, that would, I think, in many of their minds be preferable to a court trial in the US, which would expose the blatant unconstitutionality of the case. However, the judges ended up deciding, and obviously we can't count on the current Supreme Court to respect the Constitution in this respect. Although in my day, 50 years ago, they probably would have. I would have gotten out on that had my case not been dropped for what my judge called a totality of circumstances that offends a sense of justice. And he dismissed the charges. Well, perfectly obviously, the total surveillance of his discussions with his lawyers and his doctors and everything else precludes the possibility of a fair trial, which is precluded anyway under these charges, since the Espionage Act in his case, as in mine, and all the ones in between, preclude his explaining to a jury why he did what he did. I was asked that question by my lawyer in direct examination. Why did you copy the Pentagon Papers? Same charge. The prosecutor said, objection, irrelevant. And under the Espionage Act, which is known as a strict liability law, which means motivation is not an element of the defense. Did you copy the papers or not? Which is not that unjust for spies. They don't really have wonderful extenuating circumstances to tell the jury why they gave this information to an enemy in wartime, let's say. But it has everything to do with the whistleblower who is violating secrecy regulations with the intent of saving lives and protecting the Constitution. And as in Julian's case in 2010, revealing criminality by the government so there can be accountability and a real change in practice, which has not happened. As I said, President Obama ruled out accountability. One person went to prison in connection with the torture program. That was John Kiriakou. Is that what you just said?
Yeah.
John Kiriakou, who revealed the name of a torturer. The torturer, no one else held accountable at all.